It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seems to slow down just enough for people to catch their breath. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple before surrendering to the deep blue of night. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the suburban roads. Marcus Johnson was driving home after spending the day with family, his mom's hearty cooking still lingering in his memory. He tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel, humming along to the soft jazz playing on the radio. Life felt simple in moments like these. Marcus wasn't just any driver. He was a decorated Air Force veteran who had seen more than most people could imagine. Years spent serving overseas had taught him discipline, patience, and how to stay calm under pressure. But tonight, all he wanted was to get back to his cozy apartment, kick off his shoes, and relax. His sleek black sedan glided smoothly down the road, obeying every rule of the road. Or so he thought. Unbeknownst to Marcus, someone was watching him. Officer Greg Monroe sat in his patrol car parked near the curb, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Monroe was known around the station for being tough, sometimes too tough. Some called him dedicated. Others whispered that he had a chip on his shoulder, especially when it came to pulling over drivers who didn't look like him. Tonight, though, he wasn't thinking about reputations or stereotypes. He was bored, and boredom made him restless. As Marcus passed by, Monroe's eyes caught the faint glow of his rear taillights. Something clicked in his mind. He swore he saw the car move just a hair faster than the posted speed limit. Whether it actually did or not didn't matter much to Monroe. What mattered was that he now had something to do. Flipping on his flashing lights, he eased out onto the road behind Marcus, following protocol but already forming judgments in his head. Marcus glanced at his rearview mirror and sighed. Seeing those red and blue lights always gave him a sinking feeling, even though he prided himself on being a careful driver. Pulling over to the side of the road, he rolled down his window and waited, trying to steady his breathing. This wasn't his first traffic stop, and experience told him to remain calm no matter what happened next. Still, there was always that nagging voice in the back of his mind, reminding him that things could go sideways quickly. Moments later, Monroe stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his belt as he approached Marcus's vehicle. His boots thudded against the pavement, each step deliberate and heavy. The streetlight above cast a harsh glow over the scene, illuminating both men in stark detail. Marcus watched as Monroe leaned down slightly, peering into the car with squinted eyes. "License and registration," Monroe demanded, his tone sharp and clipped, leaving no room for pleasantries. Marcus nodded politely and reached into his glove compartment, pulling out the requested documents. He handed them over without hesitation, meeting Monroe's gaze briefly. There was something unsettling about the way the officer looked at him. Not just professional scrutiny, but something colder, almost hostile. It made Marcus uneasy, but he kept his expression neutral. Over the years, he'd learned that showing frustration or defensiveness only made situations worse. Monroe took the papers and stepped back, studying them under the dim light. His lips pressed into a thin line as he read the name. Marcus Johnson. The picture matched the man sitting in the car, a tall, broad-shouldered black man with a clean-shaven face and aviator sunglasses perched neatly on his forehead. Nothing seemed out of place, yet Monroe couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the expensive-looking sedan, or maybe it was the composed demeanor that contrasted sharply with the nervousness Monroe expected from someone in this situation. Whatever it was, it rubbed him the wrong way. "Where are you coming from?" Monroe asked abruptly, his voice louder than necessary. "I was visiting family," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm heading home now." Monroe tilted his head slightly. Skepticism etched across his features. "Visiting family, huh? Where exactly?" "My mom lives a few towns over," Marcus explained, keeping his tone even. "We had dinner together." The officer crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed. "And why are you dressed so fancy for a family dinner?" Marcus resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He was wearing slacks and a button-up shirt, hardly formal attire, but he understood the implication behind the question. "I just got back from work," he said simply. "Is there a problem, officer?" For a moment, Monroe didn't respond. Instead, he stared at Marcus, as if searching for some hidden clue that would justify his growing suspicion. When nothing surfaced, his frustration bubbled over. Without warning, he shifted his stance and placed his hand on the grip of his holstered gun. "Step out of the vehicle," Monroe ordered, his voice rising. "Now!" Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew better than to argue. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, raising his hand slightly to show he posed no threat. As he stood, the cool night air hit his skin, sending a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop anymore. It felt like something far more dangerous. Monroe circled around the car, his movements tense and jerky. "Face the vehicle and put your hands on the roof," he commanded, his voice laced with hostility. Marcus complied, pressing his palms flat against the cold metal. Every instinct screamed at him to say something, to explain himself, but he bit his tongue. He'd been in situations like this before, and he knew speaking up often made things worse. For now, survival meant silence. But as Monroe loomed behind him, Marcus couldn't help but wonder how this had escalated so quickly. All he'd done was drive home from a family dinner. Was this really about speeding, or was it something deeper, something uglier? The seconds ticked by like hours, each one stretching longer than the last. Marcus clenched his jaw, determined to stay calm despite the storm brewing inside him. Little did he know, this encounter was about to take an unexpected turn, one that neither man could have predicted. Officer Monroe's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the moments dragged on. His initial suspicion had morphed into something darker, fueled by assumptions and biases that simmered beneath the surface. Marcus could feel the weight of the officer's stare boring into him, even with his back turned. The air between them felt charged, thick with tension that seemed to hum louder than the distant hum of passing cars. "All right, listen up," Monroe barked, pacing back and forth, behind Marcus like a predator circling its prey. "You're telling me you were just visiting your mom? That's your story?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "Like I said, we had dinner together. Nothing more, nothing less." Monroe scoffed, shaking his head as if he'd caught Marcus in some elaborate lie. "People like you always have excuses," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus stiffened at the comment but forced himself to stay calm. He knew better than to let frustration get the better of him. Instead, he focused on breathing deeply, channeling the discipline he'd honed during his years in the military. But Monroe wasn't done yet. If anything, he was only warming up. "What kind of job do you have that lets you drive a car like this?" Monroe demanded, gesturing toward the sleek sedan. "This doesn't look like something a regular guy can afford." "It's not stolen, if that's what you're implying," Marcus shot back, unable to mask the edge creeping into his tone. "I bought it myself, fair and square. I served my country overseas and I worked hard to get where I am today." Monroe paused mid-step, narrowing his eyes at Marcus. For a split second there was silence, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then, without warning, Monroe snapped, "Don't give me that serve my country nonsense," he spat, taking a step closer. "Everyone says that when they're trying to wriggle out of trouble. You think throwing around words like veteran is going to make me go easy on you?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd heard comments like this before, remarks loaded with doubt and disrespect, but hearing them now, in this moment, stung more than usual. It wasn't just about him. It was about all the sacrifices he'd made, all the nights spent away from loved ones, all the risks he'd taken in service of a nation that sometimes treated him like an outsider. And here was this man, dismissing it all with a sneer. "I'm not making anything up," Marcus said firmly, keeping his hands planted on the roof of the car. "If you want proof, I can show you. My credentials are right inside." Monroe snorted, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, sure, because everyone carries their credentials around in their glove compartment." For a moment, Marcus considered letting it go. He could see where this was headed. Monroe would continue berating him, searching for any excuse to justify his actions. But then Marcus remembered something important. He didn't owe this man subservience. He'd earned the right to stand tall, to demand respect. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head to glance over his shoulder. "Officer," Marcus began, his voice measured but firm, "you're entitled to ask questions, but I'm also entitled to answer them honestly. I've done nothing wrong here, and you know it. So why don't we cut through the theatrics and handle this like adults?" Monroe bristled at the suggestion, his face reddening with anger. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he shouted, jabbing a finger in Marcus's direction. "You're the one who decided to speed through my neighborhood, acting all high and mighty in that fancy car of yours. Now you're lecturing me?" "That's rich." Marcus exhaled sharply, realizing that reason wasn't going to work. This wasn't about facts or logic anymore. It was about control. Monroe needed to assert dominance to remind Marcus of his place. But Marcus wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. "Not tonight." "Fine," Marcus said after a pause, his tone shifting slightly. "If you insist on playing games, let's play. Ask whatever you want. I've got nothing to hide." The challenge hung in the air, daring Monroe to call his bluff. For a moment, the officer hesitated, as if unsure whether to escalate further or retreat, but pride won out. "All right, smart guy," Monroe growled, stepping closer until he was practically looming over Marcus. "Let's see those so-called credentials of yours. Open the door and hand them over. But don't try anything funny. I'm watching you." Marcus nodded slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. With deliberate precision, he leaned forward and opened the passenger side door. Reaching inside, he retrieved a leather folder containing his discharge papers, commendation letters, and other documents proving his military service. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were symbols of everything he'd fought for. Handing them over felt like handing over a piece of himself. Monroe snatched the folder from Marcus's hand, flipping through the pages with a mixture of skepticism and disbelief. Each document bore official seals and signatures, leaving no room for doubt. Yet instead of softening, Monroe's expression darkened further. "So what?" he muttered, tossing the folder onto the hood of the car. "Anyone can fake these days. Doesn't mean squat." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. How much more evidence did this man need? Wasn't it enough that he'd already proven his identity multiple times? Still, Marcus reminded himself that losing his temper wouldn't help. He needed to stay focused, to find a way to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. Then, an idea struck him, one last card to play. Reaching into his pocket, Marcus pulled out his phone. He held it up slightly, ensuring Monroe could see it. "If you won't believe the documents," Marcus said evenly, "maybe you'll believe someone else. Let me make a call." Monroe froze, his brow furrowing in confusion. "A call? To who?" "To the Pentagon," Marcus replied, his voice unwavering. "They'll confirm everything I've told you. All you have to do is listen." For the first time since the encounter began, Monroe looked genuinely unsettled. The Pentagon? The sheer audacity of the claim caught him off guard. Surely this guy couldn't be serious. Could he? "Well," Marcus pressed, raising an eyebrow, "are you going to stand there questioning me, or are you going to let me prove my point?" Monroe hesitated, his grip on his weapon loosening ever so slightly. Deep down, he knew he was treading dangerous ground. If Marcus really did have connections to the Pentagon, and if he followed through on that call, the consequences could be disastrous for Monroe. But backing down now would mean admitting he'd been wrong, something his pride refused to allow. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Monroe stepped back, lowering his gun just a fraction. "Fine," he muttered grudgingly. "Make your call. But if this is some kind of trick, it's not," Marcus interrupted, cutting him off. "Trust me, officer. By the time this is over, you'll wish you'd believed me from the start." With that, Marcus dialed the number, putting the call on speakerphone. As the line rang, anticipation crackled in the air. Neither man spoke, each waiting to see how the other would react once the truth came to light. And in that moment, Marcus realized something important. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed moments like this to happen. It was about standing up, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. The voice on the other end of the line answered moments later, setting the stage for a confrontation neither man would soon forget. The sharp, authoritative voice on the other end of the line cut through the tension like a knife. "Pentagon Command Center," the operator announced crisply, their tone professional and unwavering. Marcus didn't waste a second. He spoke clearly, into the phone, his voice steady but firm. "This is Major Marcus Johnson. I'm currently detained during a traffic stop in city name, and I need verification of my identity and service status." For a moment, there was silence as the operator processed the request. Then came the response. "One moment, Major Johnson. Let me pull up your records." Officer Monroe stood frozen, his face pale and his posture rigid. The gun he had been clutching so tightly moments ago now hung loosely at his side, almost forgotten. His eyes darted between Marcus and the phone, disbelief warring with panic in his expression. This wasn't supposed to happen. Traffic stops were supposed to be simple, routine. But this was something else entirely. As they waited for the operator to return, Marcus turned slightly to face Monroe, his gaze calm but piercing. "You see, officer," he said evenly, "when you serve your country, people tend to remember. They keep records, and those records don't lie." Monroe opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it again. What could he say? His earlier bravado had crumbled under the weight of reality, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he felt truly out of his depth. Finally, the operator's voice returned, cutting through the uneasy quiet. "Major Marcus Johnson, confirmed active duty status with commendable service record. Is there anything else we can assist you with?" Marcus nodded, even though the operator couldn't see him. "That'll be all, thank you." "Thank you for your service, Major," the operator replied before ending the call. The line went dead, but the impact of the conversation lingered heavily in the air. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned fully toward Monroe, who looked like a man caught in headlights. Sweat trickled down the officer's temple and his hands trembled slightly as he tried and failed to regain his composure. "Well?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you still doubt me, Officer Monroe? Or are we done here?" Monroe stammered, his usual confidence replaced by awkward fumbling. He cleared his throat, trying to salvage whatever shred of authority he had left. "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir, just doing my job." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his demeanor calm but unyielding. "Doing your job? Is that what you call pulling someone over based on assumptions? Threatening them with a gun because they dared to drive a nice car? Because if that's your idea of doing your job, then maybe it's time you reconsidered your approach." Monroe shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "Look, mistakes happen. Nobody's perfect." "No, they're not," Marcus agreed, his voice hardening slightly. "But when those mistakes stem from prejudice, they become a problem. A big one. You profiled me tonight, officer. You judged me before you even knew my name. And if I hadn't had the resources to prove you wrong, where would this have ended? Would you have arrested me, harassed me further, something worse?" Monroe didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth of Marcus's words hit too close to home, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable reality of his actions. He glanced around nervously, as if looking for an escape route, but there was none. All he could do was stand there, humiliated and exposed, while Marcus continued to speak. "This isn't just about me," Marcus added, his tone softening slightly, but still carrying a weight that demanded attention. "It's about every person who doesn't have the luxury of calling the Pentagon or anyone else to bail them out. It's about the countless black men and women who've been treated exactly how you treated me tonight. Only difference is, most of them don't walk away without consequences. Some don't walk away at all." Monroe swallowed hard, guilt flashing across his face. He wanted to defend himself, to argue that he wasn't racist, that he was just doing his duty. But deep down, he knew better. His behavior tonight hadn't been about enforcing the law, it had been about power. About making someone feel small so he could feel big. And now, faced with the undeniable evidence of his wrongdoing, he couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. I didn't mean for things to go this far, Monroe muttered lamely, his voice barely above a whisper. But they did, Marcus countered, his gaze unflinching. And that's the problem. Intentions don't matter when the outcome is harmful. What matters is accountability. What matters is learning from your mistakes and making sure they don't happen again. Monroe nodded weakly, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. I'll note this in my report, he offered feebly. Make sure it's documented properly. That's not enough, Marcus said firmly. Documentation doesn't change behavior, action does. If you're serious about fixing this, start by admitting you were wrong, not just to me but to yourself. Then take steps to ensure you never treat another person this way. Apologize publicly. Attend training sessions on implicit bias. Do whatever it takes to grow. Because if you don't, nothing changes. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Monroe stared at the ground, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For the first time in his career, he realized the full weight of his actions, and the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. It wasn't just about catching bad guys or writing tickets. It was about serving the community, protecting its members, and treating everyone with fairness and respect. Tonight he had failed miserably at that. Marcus watched him silently for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. Then, without another word, he turned back to his car and retrieved the documents Monroe had tossed onto the hood earlier. Carefully, he placed them back in the leather folder and slid it into the glove compartment. "Good night, officer," Marcus said finally, his voice neutral but laced with finality. "Let's hope our paths don't cross like this again." Without waiting for a response, he climbed back into his sedan and started the engine. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. Monroe stood there, motionless, bathed in the harsh glow of the streetlights. For once, the roles were reversed. The officer looked small, powerless, and utterly human. Driving home, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had won this battle, but he knew the war against systemic injustice was far from over. Still, tonight proved something important. Even in the face of prejudice, courage and integrity could prevail. And sometimes, all it took was a single phone call to remind someone of their humanity and their accountability. Months had passed since that fateful night under the streetlights, but its echoes continued to reverberate through Marcus's life and the lives of countless others. What began as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a catalyst for change, sparking conversations and actions that reached far beyond the boundaries of his small suburban town. For Marcus, the journey wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about creating a legacy of resilience, advocacy, and hope. The mentorship program he launched became the cornerstone of his efforts. It grew from a modest initiative held in community centers to a structured organization with chapters across multiple cities. Marcus poured his heart into it, spending weekends training volunteers, developing curriculum materials, and speaking directly to participants. The program focused on empowering young Black men, teaching them how to navigate interactions with law enforcement safely while fostering confidence and self-worth. One Saturday morning, Marcus stood in front of a group of teenagers gathered in a brightly lit gymnasium. Some were shy, avoiding eye contact, while others leaned forward eagerly, soaking up every word. Marcus smiled warmly, his presence both commanding and comforting. "All right, team," he began, pacing slowly as he spoke. "Let's talk about what happens when you're pulled over by an officer. First thing, stay calm. Easier said than done, I know, but remember this. Your reaction can shape the entire situation. Keep your hands visible, answer questions respectfully, and don't escalate things unnecessarily." He paused, letting the advice sink in before continuing. "Now here's the most important part. Always remind yourself that you deserve respect. No matter who you're dealing with, no matter their badge or title, never let anyone make you feel less than human. You are valuable. Period. The room erupted in quiet murmurs of agreement. A boy in the front row raised his hand hesitantly. "What if they still treat us wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the weight of the question. "That's where preparation comes in," he replied. "Record everything if you can. Know your rights. And after the fact, report. Misconduct to the proper authorities. Don't suffer in silence, there's power in speaking up. But also surround yourself with people who support you. Build a network of friends, mentors, and allies who will stand with you when times get tough." As the session wrapped up, Marcus watched the teens file out of the gym, chatting animatedly among themselves. He felt a swell of pride knowing that these young men were leaving not only with practical tools but also with renewed confidence. They weren't just learning how to survive, they were learning how to thrive. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Monroe faced a reckoning of his own. His suspension stretched into months, during which he attended mandatory sensitivity training sessions and underwent psychological evaluations. At first, Monroe resisted the process, dismissing it as unnecessary punishment. But as the weeks went by, something shifted inside him. The stories shared by trainers and fellow officers forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about himself, but about the system he'd sworn to uphold. One particularly poignant moment came during a role-playing exercise designed to simulate real-life scenarios involving implicit bias. Monroe found himself playing the role of a driver being questioned aggressively by another participant, acting as an officer. As the officer barked orders and made baseless accusations, Monroe felt a surge of panic, a taste of what Marcus must have experienced that night. When the exercise ended, Monroe sat silently, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. That's how it feels," he admitted quietly during the debriefing session. "I never realized." His trainer nodded sympathetically. "It's easy to forget what it's like on the other side of the badge until you experience it yourself. That's why empathy is so important. It's not just about following rules, it's about understanding the impact of our actions." Monroe left the session with a heavy heart but also a glimmer of resolve. For the first time, he began to see his role differently, not as a figure of authority meant to dominate, but as someone entrusted with protecting and serving all members of the community equally. He knew rebuilding trust would take time, but he vowed to try. Back in the public sphere, Marcus's story inspired broader movements for systemic reform. Local activists collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at increasing police accountability and transparency. One landmark bill required departments to implement regular anti-bias training for officers, establish independent review boards for misconduct cases, and mandate the release of body camera footage within 48 hours of an incident. Though passing the bill required months of lobbying, protests, and negotiations, it eventually gained enough support to become law. On the day the governor signed the bill into effect, Marcus stood alongside Reverend Daniels, community leaders, and families affected by police brutality. Cameras flashed as reporters captured the historic moment, capturing smiles and tears alike. Afterward, Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice filled with emotion. "This victory belongs to all of us," he declared, "to every person who marched, who testified, who refused to stay silent. Change doesn't happen overnight. But today proves that persistence pays off. Let's keep pushing forward, for justice, for equality, for a future we can all believe in." Applause thundered through the square, carrying with it a sense of collective triumph. Yet Marcus reminded everyone that the fight was far from over. While the new laws marked significant progress, true transformation required ongoing effort, from holding institutions accountable to addressing deeper societal inequities. As the months turned into years, Marcus's influence continued to grow. He traveled across the country, delivering speeches at universities, conferences, and community events. His message remained consistent. Courage, integrity, and unity could overcome even the toughest challenges. Along the way, he connected with individuals whose stories mirrored his own, forming bonds that strengthened his resolve. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment reflecting on his journey, he received a phone call from an unexpected source. Officer Monroe. Hesitant but sincere, Monroe apologized once again for his behavior that night and thanked Marcus for inspiring him to seek redemption. "I won't pretend I've fixed everything," Monroe admitted, "but I'm trying. And I owe a lot of that to you. If it weren't for what happened that night, I might still be making the same mistakes." Marcus listened quietly, then responded with grace. "We all make mistakes, Greg. What matters is what we do afterward. Keep working toward change, not just for yourself but for others too. That's how we heal." After hanging up, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the countless lives touched by his advocacy, the policies enacted to protect marginalized communities, and the ripple effects of standing up against injustice. There were still battles to fight, but for now, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't just about one man's encounter with prejudice. It was about the power of resilience, the importance of accountability, and the enduring hope for a better tomorrow. Underneath the stars that stretched endlessly above, Marcus smiled softly, knowing that his journey had The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet suburban neighborhood where Marcus lived, casting golden light across rooftops and sidewalks. It was a new day, but the events of the previous night lingered heavily in Marcus's mind. He couldn't shake the image of Officer Monroe standing there under the streetlight, humiliated, exposed, and forced to confront the consequences of his actions. While some might have felt satisfaction in seeing someone like Monroe brought down a peg, Marcus didn't feel triumphant. Instead, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. What had happened wasn't just about him. It was part of a much larger issue that needed addressing. As Marcus sipped his coffee and scrolled through his phone at the kitchen table, he noticed something unexpected. The incident had already started making waves online. Someone passing by must have recorded parts of the confrontation and uploaded the video to social media. Within hours, it had gone viral. The clip showed Monroe drawing his weapon on Marcus, followed by the tense exchange and the pivotal moment when Marcus placed the call to the Pentagon. Comments poured in from all over the country, some praising Marcus for his composure, others condemning Monroe for his behavior, and many sharing their own stories of similar encounters with law enforcement. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. He hadn't intended for this to become public, but now that it had, he saw an opportunity. People were paying attention, and attention could lead to change. But how could he use this moment wisely? How could he turn a personal ordeal into something meaningful? That afternoon, Marcus decided to visit Reverend Daniels, a local community leader who had spent decades advocating for racial justice and police reform. The Reverend's church was nestled in the heart of the neighborhood, its doors always open to those seeking guidance or support. When Marcus arrived, Reverend Daniels greeted him warmly, ushering him into a cozy office filled with books, photographs, and awards commemorating years of service. "Marcus, my boy," Reverend Daniels said, clasping his hands together, "I heard about what happened last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though the faint shadow in his eyes suggested otherwise. "Physically, I'm okay. Emotionally, well, let's just say it's been a lot to process." Reverend Daniels nodded knowingly. "It always is. Being put in a situation like that, it tests your strength, your patience, your faith. You handled yourself with grace, son. That's not easy to do." "Thanks," Marcus said softly. "But here's the thing. I don't want this to end with me walking away unscathed while nothing changes. I want to use this moment to make a difference, to push for real accountability and reform. I just don't know where to start." The Reverend smiled gently, leaning forward in his chair. "Well, you've come to the right place. Change starts with people willing to speak up, and you've already done that. Now we amplify your voice. Together we can turn this into a movement." Over the next hour, they brainstormed ideas. Reverend Daniels suggested organizing a town hall meeting to discuss police accountability and systemic racism. They would Invite local officials, community members, and even representatives from law enforcement agencies to participate in an open dialogue. Marcus agreed, adding that he wanted to share his story publicly, not as a victim, but as someone committed to creating a better future. Word spread quickly about the upcoming event. Flyers appeared in shop windows, posts circulated on social media, and news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the growing demand for reform. By the time the evening of the town hall arrived, the small auditorium at the community center was packed to capacity. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds filled the seats, united by a shared desire for justice. When Marcus stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He stood tall, dressed simply in a button-up shirt and slacks, his presence commanding yet approachable. For a moment, he scanned the crowd, taking in the sea of faces before him. Then, he began to speak. "Good evening, everyone." Marcus started, his voice steady and clear. "First, I want to thank each of you for being here tonight. Your presence shows that you care, not just about me, but about our community and the kind of world we want to build for ourselves and our children." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What happened to me 2 nights ago wasn't unique. It wasn't rare. In fact, it happens far too often. To black men, women, and children who deserve better. Some of these stories end peacefully, like mine did. Others don't. And that's unacceptable." The audience murmured in agreement, nodding along as Marcus spoke. "But here's the thing," he continued. "This isn't just about one bad cop or one bad traffic stop. This is about a system that allows these things to happen in the first place. A system that lets bias, fear, and prejudice dictate how people are treated. We need to hold individuals accountable, yes, but we also need to fix the structures that enable them to act without consequence." Applause erupted throughout the room, echoing off the walls. Marcus raised a hand to quiet the crowd before continuing. "So tonight I'm asking all of us to commit to action, whether it's pushing for policy changes, supporting organizations working toward reform, or simply having conversations with friends and family about why this matters. We all have a role to play. And I promise you, I'll be doing my part too." By the end of his speech, the entire room was on its feet, cheering and clapping. Among those in attendance were journalists, activists, and influential figures eager to lend their support. One reporter approached Marcus afterward, microphone in hand. "Major Johnson," she began, "your story has resonated with so many people. What's next for you? Do you plan to file a formal complaint against Officer Monroe?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, I will be filing a complaint," he said firmly. "Accountability is important. But more than that, I hope this sparks a broader conversation about how we train officers, how we evaluate their performance, and how we ensure they serve every member of the community fairly. This isn't about revenge, it's about progress." Meanwhile, Officer Monroe was dealing with fallout of his own. News of the incident had reached his department, sparking an internal investigation. His colleagues avoided him in the break room, whispering behind his back about the viral video and the embarrassment it had brought to the force. The chief of police called him into his office for a private meeting, where he delivered a stern reprimand. "Greg," the chief said, shaking his head in disappointment. "What were you thinking? Drawing your weapon on a decorated veteran? Threatening someone because of assumptions you made? This isn't just damaging to your career, it's damaging to the reputation of this entire department." Monroe hung his head, shame washing over him. "Sir, I messed up. I know that now. I got caught up in my own biases, and I let them cloud my judgment. I swear it won't happen again." "It better not," the chief warned. "You're suspended indefinitely pending further review. Mandatory sensitivity training is non-negotiable, and if I hear of another incident like this, you're done. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Monroe mumbled, his voice barely audible. Back at home, Monroe sat alone in his dimly lit living room, replaying the events of the past few days in his mind. He couldn't escape the feeling of failure, not just professionally, but personally. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact when he passed by, and even his wife seemed distant, unable to look at him the same way. For the first time, he realized the true cost of his actions, not just for others, but for himself. While Monroe grappled with guilt and regret, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work. He partnered with local organizations to launch a mentorship program aimed at helping young black men navigate interactions with law enforcement safely and confidently. Through workshops, seminars, and one-on-one sessions, he taught participants strategies for de-escalation, self-advocacy, and resilience. "You may not always get the respect you deserve," Marcus told a group of teenagers during one session, "but you can control how you respond. Stay calm, stay aware, and remember your worth. No one can take that away from you." The program gained traction quickly, attracting attention from schools, churches, and youth centers across the region. Donations poured in, allowing Marcus to expand its reach and impact. Slowly but surely, he was building something meaningful, a legacy rooted in empowerment and hope. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that single traffic stop continued to spread. Policy reforms were proposed at the city council level, including mandatory body cameras for all officers and stricter guidelines for use of force incidents. Community relations improved as trust began to rebuild, thanks in large part to initiatives like Marcus's mentorship program. For Marcus, the journey was far from over. There would be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt along the way. But he remained steadfast in his mission, knowing that change took time and persistence. Each life he touched, each person he inspired, brought him one step closer to the world he envisioned. A world where no one had to prove their humanity to anyone else. And though the road ahead was long, Marcus walked it with purpose, determined to leave a mark that would endure long after.